Hello and welcome to SACAC's webinar 201 for college visits. Dave and I are excited to bring you another amazing collection of panelists here to share their insight from both sides of the desk about how we can help support students to maximize high school visits, college tours, all number of interactions that we have with them. We'll start off by having our panelists introduce themselves, and then we will jump right into questions. Grace, do you want to take us away?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Loughhead, and I currently work at Washington and Lee University. And I help to coordinate visits here on campus and run our Johnson Scholarship Program. And I've been doing admission work for the last 13 years.
Great. Thank you, Grace.
You're welcome.
Ben?
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Ben Wescott, and I'm Associate Director of Admission at Rhodes College here in Memphis. I don't help to plan events specifically, but obviously I'm very involved in a school our size. It's a group effort. But anyway, happy to be here. I've been in admission for about 8 years.
Perfect. Thank you. And Kerri?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kerri Caruso. I'm the College Scholarship Coordinator at Mount Carmel Academy in New Orleans. I got involved in this by planning college tours for a group of high school students, and I've been in college advising for the last 7 or 8 years.
Perfect. Well, we're so excited to have everybody with us today. Grace and Ben, we will chat with you soon. So, Kerri, you told us a little bit about your background, that you started out with college tours. Tell me about when you're working with students or families, how do you determine what kind of interaction with a college is the best place for them to start, or even figure out what they've done so far?
One of the things that helped me determine where to start with what they should be doing is their age. You know, some students are super eager, and we're very lucky in New Orleans to have a college fair in the fall through NACAC and a college fair in the spring that's sponsored by the Archdiocese. And so for younger students, particularly at the sophomore level, we do encourage them to start looking at schools that come to the spring college fair, or if that date, doesn't work, we've already promoted the fall college fair for them. Then by the fall of their junior year, we certainly encourage them to visit with the reps when they do come on campus, and to start visiting those colleges personally when they have time. Again, in New Orleans, we're very lucky. We have the Mardi Gras holidays, and for most of the country, it's just a regular Tuesday. So we very much encourage students to take advantage of that holiday, because it's a week off for our students when it comes to things like travel and, if they have to go great distances, or if they're already going out of town at that time. But for some students, just to get a sense of what differences, there can be in colleges, we encourage them to just look at some local schools.
Two great nuggets that I heard in there is you encouraging students to leverage free days that they have from high schools. I think we all wish we had the Mardi Gras holidays.
Yeah.
But for us, we have conference days, like 2 random Wednesdays a year. There are no classes so that students can meet with teachers if they're struggling. So thinking about a calendar for wherever you are, there are probably those kinds of days that folks can leverage.
Yes, we have quite a number of professional development days for our faculty, and they don't always fall on a Friday where you could do some natural weekend travel, but they do provide an opportunity if you wanted to go someplace that's 2 hours away or 3 hours away, leaving here at noon on a Monday and getting, someplace, regional and coming back that same evening. It's a long day, a long drive, but it certainly is doable as well.
Okay. So with your experience with planning college tours, you've done some close by, have you planned any tours for pretty far distances for your students?
Yes. So my kind of entree into this world, I would say, started in 2003, 2004. And I planned a college tour visiting different kinds of colleges in different regions of the country for about 40 or so students. And the idea was this was how you could begin to build your list, just sort of seeing what it was out there. It provided an economical way for us to bring folks to parts of the country that their parents either couldn't take them to or didn't, this teenager was like, I can't imagine spending 8 days in the car with my mom and dad doing this, just sort of a fun way of seeing different kinds of schools. And for us, we invited rising juniors and rising seniors to attend. And in certain years, we would invite very highly focused, highly motivated rising sophomores, depending on where we were going and availability of space on the bus.
So for a college counselor who's thinking about taking on, creating a college tour for their students, how do you determine where to go and which colleges to see?
So for the audience that I had worked with previously, the students, I solicited the students' feedback. I worked with a college advisor at that high school to find out where students were mostly matriculating and where they were primarily looking. And so we used that as a way to start that first tour. When I went to, and then the girls gave me feedback every year about where else they were looking, what else they were considering. And so we, did trips to the Northeast. We did trips to Washington, D.C., Chicago, the Midwest, Texas, just sort of depending on interest and need and sort of what we wanted, sort of our goals institutionally. When I went to a different high school that had a different student population, I really had to kind of assess differently where they were. And so what I wound up doing was we did shorter trips. We went to Atlanta and came back. One, just, the students were working in the summer or they had other things that were taking up their time. I also did day trips with students because for some of them, parents were working at night. They were working in these shift sort of situations. And so we would do day trips or one night overnight trips to sort of accommodate for their schedule. So I've done it in a variety of ways, but the way you arrive at that is to really look at who are the parents, what are their financial means, and where the students, where do you think their students should be looking versus and where they are looking.
It's so critically important to meet the student wherever they are, whether it's in determining the types of college tours or interactions that you do, but also in the list building. I know that we've talked before about on a different webinar about working with juniors and kind of creating these lists based on their interests. Give me some of your best, tips and tricks that you have around, you tell a student, I think you should visit this school. They visit that school or they set up a visit, but they don't really know how to research to determine if that school is a fit for them or to research to determine what questions to ask. How do you coach them on that?
So we are very lucky in my current school that we have time built into the school day where I can have mini sessions specifically for sophomores and juniors and on various topics. And one of them is on how to search a college website for the information that you're looking for. There's at times we find great inconsistency in where information is housed, but we provide them, we make available to all students kind of a listing of the things that you should be looking for on a university's website. We go over with how to find it at specific schools. And then, that search box at the top right-hand corner can really be a student's or a parent's best friend. It's, which colleges are housing costs and scholarships under the admissions tab versus which ones are putting it in their own tab or under financial aid, or it's not always clear. And so that is one way that we have helped students is by literally sitting there in a presentation style seminar where they have their, maps in front of them and showing them how do you search. Let's go through this exercise for exercise.
I've heard that referred to as the 5 clicks rule, that you can't just go to a university's homepage and think you know everything about them. That if you click about 5 in, you tend to get somewhere that's really interesting. So that's something that's always stuck with me. I read a great post recently that the Georgia Tech admission blog put out about getting to the good questions. One example was if a student is asking about retention, are they really trying to ask why do students leave? And what's happening there. Tell us a little bit about how you help students get to the good questions beyond just showing them how to do the research on the website.
Well, one way that we that I help guide students is to figure out as much about their background as I can. Meaning, if I'm working with a family who's got, one partial college attendee and, one non-college attendee or something, I may give them and help with them with just some basic questions to get them started. But over time, what I like is that the goal is to get them all to become savvy consumers. You don't go out and buy a house without touring, without seeing, without asking questions. And the more you tour and the more exposed you are to sort of hearing the same things, at one point it was, oh, we have a blue light on campus, or, oh, let me show you this fabulous new rec center, or, it's sort of, once you have heard something more than once at several, you become more savvy in how to ask those questions. And so, I think for me, it's about working with them as they go through this process to say, okay, so you really liked this school. What was it that you learned about it that kind of stuck in your mind? And what was it about the school that I think you should be learning more about? And that's where we just sort of individualize that, because we're a large school. It's very difficult to sort of meet one-on-one after every college tour somebody has taken, or so we have to try to equip them, I think, just with some introductory things first, and then move into, okay, now that you've toured this school and it was, across the street from, where you're living. Okay, now when you go to this place, let's think about those questions in a different way.
Yeah, that reflection piece is so important. After you tour, or after you meet with a college during a high school visit, if you're a high school counselor, helping students reflect on what they learned and what questions they still have is a great starting point. Kerri, we've got a question from a attendee. And folks, if you're new to our webinars, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A little icon that you can click. And if you have questions while we're chatting with anybody, please feel free to pose those questions there, and we'll make sure to get them answered. But Kerri, this question is about when you're researching with students on websites or things like that. Obviously, we know that it's very difficult to change anything on a website if you work at most universities. Same for high school. Don't feel like you're isolated in that, colleges. What are the things that students are looking for the most? And what are the things that you are directing them to look at the most, so that colleges can kind of get an idea of where that information would be on their respective sites?
So one of the things that I think students are looking for the most are application or admissions type information, which is very clear. There's the prospective colleges link, the admissions link. But I think what they're looking for is, am I a good candidate for being accepted? And sort of what are the qualities that make a good student here? They can read on Naviance, the stats on where students are being accepted. But I think when they're trying to get a sense of, will I be a good candidate at this school? And for the parents, the crucial part where I direct them is the net price calculators. They're not all perfect. Some of them are better than others, but that is one piece, particularly for families where they're, in New Orleans, at least for my market, they've been in Catholic school paying private school education, since kindergarten or before. And so for them, they may not have had the opportunity to save as much. So net price calculators are really important, and they're not always the easiest to find. I usually just do a Google search, name of institution plus net price calculator, and it will bring me there. Sometimes admissions blogs are difficult to find on college websites. I tried to find one the other day for a student, and I wound up just Googling it, just sort of to show them that. So I think those are the types of things that students are going there for, beyond sort of that initial, this is the deadline, these are the stats, these are the things they can find. If you're a high school that has Naviance, that they can find on that. They're looking beyond the numbers in a way.
That's great. And to kind of pivot and ask another question, as you were planning college tours for students, especially the ones that were multiple days and to colleges that were out of region, is that something that your school covered the cost for? Did students fundraise? Did they pay? Did colleges cover the cost? How did you work on that funding piece?
So our students pay for it. Even my day trips, where I would rent a car and load them up and all that, they pay, the cost was offset to the students. And it includes everything, their meals, their lodging, any fun activity we would do in a region. So all of that was included. I did know there was another high school in the city who had done one. It was a charter school, public school, and they received funding for theirs through a grant in part, and then they offset a portion of the cost to their students, and they raised money and did some other things. So we try to be as economical as possible, only staying at the hotels where breakfast is included, and trying to eat on campus as often as possible, because it's such a big part of living there, or someplace that's kind of the college hangout pizza joint or something, to sort of keep costs at a minimum. What we have found over the years is that the cost for the bus has just increased exponentially. So we try to just maximize on the number of students who can comfortably be in the bus with luggage and all that, but yet still keep it under. The trips usually hover between, around $800, I think, for, an 8 or 9 day trip, depending on what we're able to do and where we're going.
Okay. Well, great. And we did get one last question regarding transportation to clarify renting vans versus buses. And, I think that that's really a specific school by school basis. Would you agree?
Yes.
Schools have different policies.
Yes. So everybody has different rules, different regulations, and things of that nature with insurances and just sort of their school's policy is, I was very fortunate to work at a school where, given the demographics and some other things, at the school I came from prior to and this one, I would not be driving students. So I think that it does sort of depend on where you are. It depends on your student population and your parent population as far as what is and is sort of allowed by that. But, I've even worked with other local college counselors on planning sort of a state of Louisiana tour where, or a regional tour just by bus. In other words, you're going for 3 days or 5 days, but it's a very small chartered bus kind of scenario. Or if there was somebody on campus who had, their CDL license that could drive this quote unquote the school bus, right, to get to different places. I think that sometimes you have to be creative when it comes to funding and those sources.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kerri. And Kerri will be back with us at the end if we have any further questions for her. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Hey, Ben.
Hey.
Hey. So we're going to change gears a little bit, folks, and we're going to talk about what it's like from the college perspective when you're thinking about the purpose of student visits and the different forms that they can take. So, Ben, we're going to assume that most of our audience knows about the different kinds of ways that a student could engage, with a college. But I want to hear your pro tips for what events, whether it's a high school visit, a tour, a information session in a community, a luncheon, things like that. What kinds of questions are best suited in different scenarios?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing you're getting at is making sure that your experience with the college, whether it be an on-campus visit or if it's an event in your community that the college has traveled to, making sure that the experience is going to align with your interests. So if you are, if you're a student who's a sophomore or junior and you're visiting colleges, I call that the window shopping phase, where, you're not necessarily trying things on yet. You want to see what looks cute. And, and at that phase, open houses and bigger events, events that are for the masses are going to probably suit your needs as you're, kind of just getting the lay of the land. And then as you get further along in the process and you've gotten your list down, or maybe you've been accepted to schools, your visit is going to be different. So if you go to a large open house, you're going to have your individual questions answered, but it might be in a public forum. So if it's a financial question or things like that, understand that there are going to be, it might be a large group involved. It may not be a private meeting. And, it also could be, if you have specific questions that you want answered for you or your student, it's going to be, you're going to want, in my opinion, you're going to be more apt to want to visit on a day that is a little more of an intimate visit, more of a maybe even a Tuesday where there are fewer people on campus and you're going to be able to meet with people more privately. So as your questions get more specific, they're more personal to you, then you want fewer people, probably in my opinion, visiting on those days. Or the event should make sure it aligns with your interests and what type of experience you're having. Because we had an open house yesterday. It was President's Day, so of course we had a large event. And so when people come up and say, where are the interviews? Well, there's hundreds of people on campus, so we're not doing interviews today, and you shouldn't expect a one-on-one meeting probably if you're visiting on a big visit day.
Yeah, the managing expectations part is huge. I mean, I think especially if you've ever worked on the college side and now you're on the high school side or vice versa, we sort of know innately what each visit kind of purpose is, but families don't. And so making sure if you're on the high school side that you talk to your students and your families about the purpose of different ways to interact, and that as a college, you're incredibly clear about the intent of those events that you're hosting. So something recently, came out to the National Survey of Student Engagement. Ben, could you talk to us a little bit about how, you've looked at that data or how other folks in the community might consider leveraging the information there?
Sure, totally. And it's a really nice tool. It's something that Rhodes is pretty diligent about providing information to. It's a nonprofit and where colleges are doing their own institutional research, and there was no public forum where students could learn more about that research. And this provides a forum where you can learn about, most schools that you're looking at, and you can learn a little bit. It's not just, this is their average profile of their student and some things like that. It's actually polling our students. And I think it really gets at the campus culture because it's students who are taking a survey and they don't know what it's for. And so they're pretty honest, and they're talking about their career aspirations and the support they've had during that time on the campus. It talks about their internship and research support or their opportunities in studying abroad, but not just did they study abroad, but what was the support on the campus. It also talks a little bit more about, it asks student questions, hundreds of questions that students answer, and it asks about, students' background and what type of socioeconomic experience they grew up under, and then how that has translated into their experience on campus, and do they feel comfortable? Do they feel like the campus is supporting them as an individual? And so I think that's a tool that probably is not going to be helpful during your visit. But it's certainly something to take a peek at either prior to your visit, so you can kind of set the tone and kind of get a landscape of the campus culture. And then also when you return back and kind of see if your visit and your kind of interpretation of that campus culture aligned with current students, because current students obviously are not going to be there for 2 or 3 hours like your visit is, but they're living there. So that's arguably the most honest and authentic kind of reflection of the school and what type of support it's providing its students.
Yeah, that could be an incredible resource for research. If you're working with a family and they're trying to learn more about what the campus looks like. And if your school is interested in checking out this survey, affectionately called Nessie, like the Loch Ness Monster, I think it sounds like. We're going to see if we can find that link, and we'll put it up at the end of this webinar. But we post all of our webinars to the SACAC website with relevant links and attachments. And so you can check back there probably later today if you're viewing and you want to know more to find out about that. So Ben, to totally change gears, as a seasoned road warrior, I want to hear your rituals, your before, your during, and your after rituals for a high school visit. How do you prepare? What do you do during the visit to maximize that experience for students? And how do you best follow up?
The visit in terms of a student coming to visit our campus?
No, a high school visit, like when you go to high school.
Okay.
When you come visit Pam and I at Mount Vernon, what do you do to get connected?
Great question. So, I certainly want to, we are able to pull our own data. So when I sign up for a visit, when I'm kind of putting my schedule together, it's very nice because I load it into our system, and then it spits out information about your campus and your student body. And so it tells me what type of class offerings, I can look at your profile and things of that nature. But it also, more importantly, it tells me all of the students who enrolled at the college that I work at. It also makes me aware if a student perhaps left, which we don't have many students do, but that certainly happens at every campus. And so I want to be aware of students who came to my institution and left for whatever reason. And then also it tells me, quite honestly, how well they're doing academically. So, how well did that high school experience translate to their experience at Rhodes? Now, of course, we're looking at the macro level. There are kids who can be exceptional students at high school and not pan out academically at any college or university for a variety of reasons that may or may not be the student or the colleges or high school. I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but I'm looking at that. So when I walk in, I will have kind of perused that information really quickly to see who's on my campus and how well are they doing academically. And that's the basics of what I'm doing in advance. While I'm there, obviously I want to meet with as many students as I can, and I want to meet with any students to the level that they need. So some students who just want to get their feet wet and kind of got dragged into the visit because, maybe because Erin thought Rhodes might be a good fit for them. I want to meet with them, but I also, maybe there are applicants who have specific questions, and I try, if people have applied, but maybe they're, particularly in the fall, maybe their application isn't complete because of deadlines haven't come up yet. I try to update them on kind of what we're missing, because sometimes students believe that they've submitted things, and I want to make sure that it's translated on our end as well. So those are the big things. I try, if I had a particularly positive visit or something like that, I'll take note of that afterwards, and kind of look back, and all of this information goes into our system afterwards as well. So I can go back and see, okay, how many kids did I see at this school at this visit a year ago? That data is documented. So that's kind of the basics. And other college folks may have different important, things that they do. Obviously you're doing a bunch of visits. I try to do as many as I can in the fall. And so, to be honest with you, I don't have a lot more time on any individual school on the front end you're kind of living in the moment. It's hard to kind of prepare. I don't know to be honest, sometimes I don't know what city I'll be in the next week. So that's as much as I can do in the moment.
Yeah, travel season will get you.
Sure.
So when you're talking about pulling the information, just to clarify, do you pull that information from your CRM? And do you actually, on the admission side, see the retention data to know that a student has withdrawn?
Yes, I do. I'm not able to I'm sorry?
Which CRM do you use?
We use Slate. Many of our peers use Slate as well. So what happens is I load my travel schedule into Slate long before I go on the trip, and that it's a pretty sophisticated system. It sends boxes and materials and things as I request, and then before I leave, it spits out on hard copy form every single high school visit, and it tells me that retention data. Now, from a legal standpoint, I can't necessarily see why they left, whether it was academic or social or whatever the case may be. And again, we have a very competitive retention rate. We don't have a lot of kids missing, but of course, every school has kids who are who leave for whatever reason. So I don't necessarily know why, but I just want to know that, because you look silly if you don't. And sometimes I want to let the high schools sometimes don't know if the kid has made a move or left, and so I'll update the high school as well.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate knowing that, because we wish every kid would stay in touch, but they don't always do that.
Sure.
So last question. So if let's say you were tasked in your office with expanding into a territory that you don't necessarily have an established relationship with, what would you do, or what would you coach members of your team to do to begin having them develop relationships with high school counselors, and really getting into schools that they don't already have a pre-existing relationship with?
Yeah, great question. And that's something that it depends on the personality of the person. Of course, not everybody is, if people are gregarious, you want to use that as a tool. If people are smart with data and really intentional in that way, you want to make sure you're using, kind of maximizing that skill set. I have found that high school visits are maintenance, not growth opportunities, especially if you're a school that isn't, not only do you you're breaking into a market, but they're not very familiar with your school as well, and maybe you're introducing the institution to that community. Visits are going to be important, but if you just keep doing your visits, it's hard to break in. So I try to do other things, and we're fortunate at Rhodes to have the financial support to be on panels and case studies and things like that. So I'm really a big fan of those types of things, because it provides you with a different level of exposure than just doing a high school visit. Interviews are something that we do really, really well at Rhodes. And so interviews are big. So most of my evenings are consumed with doing interviews. And I'll even do interview sessions specific to a school. So I may not, if I'm in Atlanta, I don't just invite Atlanta to come do an interview with me, but I might say, okay, I might just send it to specific schools. And I say, this is a Walton High School interview night. And that makes people feel special, but more importantly, it really kind of pulls out the folks that it's a more targeted approach. I also work pretty closely with athletics. I mean, we're a Division III program, and to be honest with you, breaking into a new market can sometimes happen by, bringing in an athlete who has, they choose Rhodes for all the right reasons, hopefully, but part of that might be athletics, and there are talented athletes in every part of the country. And so I work pretty closely where if we are looking to, every school wants all 50 states, and if we're missing a kid from Vermont, I might chat with with a coach or two and say, hey, can you mind taking an extra look at athletes that are competitive for your program in Vermont? And our coaches are really are generous with their time and willing to work that piece out too. So those are some ways that we work to break into communities. And we travel hard. I mean, you're not going to, I didn't mean to, visits are important, and so are interviews. And it really, if you're going to do this effectively, you need to do all of these things comprehensively. It's also helpful to engage your alumni base in that community because they can be introduced by a neighbor or a friend of their parents or somebody who happened to have a good experience at that institution. So we try to engage that population as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Ben. And Ben will be joining us again at the end for the Q&A. So if you have questions that bubble to the top, save them for that moment.
Great. Thanks so
much. Hi, Grace.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. This is so informative. I'm so grateful to be able to listen along with y'all.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We're so excited to get your perspective. Having been in higher education for a number of years, you've seen a lot of trends come and go. And I'm actually throwing you a curveball right now because this is not a question we talked about, but it came to my mind. Tell me about your observations for how scheduling visits has changed over the years. And what are your thoughts on that? What do people need to know?
Absolutely. So when I first started, it seems super archaic, our front desk receptionist had a notebook that she literally in pencil filled out the visit. You had to call in and fill it out. I think that evolution has changed as technology has changed and as how we communicate with one another. Now if you have Slate, you can text out things, we are a Slate school as well. But I think more and more and more it's evolving to how do you reach this base online? How do we help to use this technology to work smarter and not harder in terms of helping to schedule visits? So rather than having to pick up the phone and then go back and forth with whoever you're talking to about when you can visit, a lot of schools are able to post calendars of we have availabilities this day or this day. And so really being able to leverage our online presence but also be able to keep the relationship going. I mean, this work that we do is all about building relationships, and we certainly don't want to put a screen in front of us. But that's one of the biggest things that I've seen is really being able to utilize and leverage, online scheduling as part of that for both the on-campus visit for students coming to visit us, but even for us visiting you all. There's so many different ways that we can schedule online, which for an old fogey like me can be a little bit, I'm used to picking up the phone and asking, can I come visit your school? And being able to go online is wonderful, but it certainly, I think, can be a challenge as well.
Yeah, I will say on our end, you can book me and rep visits, which are the ones that we use. They've revolutionized the number of emails that I get in the fall, which is lovely. Mm-hmm. But it is that personal connection that you miss. And so really seeking out ways to maintain the relationships with counselors, through that is critical. Speaking of online booking and scheduling, if I'm a high school counselor and I want to visit you on your campus, do I book through the regular student sign up? Is there something special that I do as a counselor? How might I figure out the best way for me to visit?
Absolutely. There are going to be some institutions where you do exactly that. You're going to book online and maneuver through that. There are also going to be some institutions that very clearly, hopefully, state on their website, please give us a call. But I think at a first glance, it allows you as a counselor to see, how is this day looking? Is there availability if I wanted to go visit on X, Y, and Z date? It gives you a starting point if you're trying to craft your week or craft your visit days. But I think, as you have questions, we all want to help. Here at our institution, it's pick up the phone and talk to my wonderful, wonderful front desk receptionist, Scotty, who will take great care of you. And for us, it's a mix. You call, and depending on if you're just coming by yourself, that's one thing. If you're bringing a group of students, we will set up an individual session for you so that you're not necessarily lumped in with the overall general information session. Because if you're coming with a group from your particular school, you're going to have particular questions that you're coming with, based on where your school is, what your background is, the complexities of your students, and sometimes having you in that group information session, for the general public, you're going to ask very specific questions that we can certainly even tailor that group information session or the campus experience, whatever that might be at any institution. We can tailor that at the front end. So a lot of institutions will do that. Some will just have you come to that general group information session, and just want to make sure that we're acknowledging that. But I think hopefully we're being clear on our end of, do you go to the website and sign up through that venue, or do you call? And I think most of us too, if it's not clear, give us a call. Again, it's that relationship. Yep, absolutely.
I definitely have found through the years that it's always better to just ask the question, because you never know, what could be customized for you and what that could look like. But Grace, we're going to talk about a couple of classic scenarios that happen, I think, to college recruiters when they either come to our high schools or when our students see them at college fairs or on campus. And if you could just share your best advice of what to do in those scenarios, that would be great. So we know that every student is a snowflake. They're all special, they're all magical in their own way. So when you have a student who's in a group setting where it's not really appropriate to get specific about their situation, whether it's financial or what not, and they go there, they get really, really personal. How do you redirect and sort of reclaim that conversation to make it applicable to a wider audience?
I think when students, parents, I've had counselors do that before too. I think when they ask that very specific question, it's going one of two ways. It's either they don't know how to make it a general question and it is very personal, and so they're just trying to ask it, or it truly is that very personal question. There's just no getting around it. And so what I always try to do is, normally you can find a nugget. If the question's a very specific, this is what my FAFSA looks like, what is my financial aid package going to be? You can take that step back and make it broader. Well, let's talk about the financial aid process here at Institution X, and let's talk through what that process means, so that you're able to cater to the wider audience in terms of that. If it's a very pointed question about an application, should I have my seventh person write my letter of recommendation, this is who they are and this is what their resume is, redirecting it to your specific institution of, well, at my previous institution, I would totally read that seventh rec. Here now, being able to talk thoughtfully about, how many recs are too many recs, and working through that. Sometimes though, they want that very specific answer for their very specific question. And sometimes it's appropriate to answer in the group setting, and sometimes, more often than not, it is not. And so for me, it's always being able to make time, depending on what the venue is. If it's a group information session at my institution, I always make sure that I don't have appointments after that group information session so that people can come up and ask questions. If it's at a school visit, you always try to make sure, as best you can, that you have time at the end. So if students have questions, they can come up and ask you those questions. And being very clear, that's a very great question that I'm sure you don't want me to, give the answer to in front of everybody. So let's find time at the end to chat. And if you don't have time, I'll give you my card and we can continue this conversation later. But making your best faith effort to try to make it broader, because more than likely they're asking a great question that you can make applicable to the broader group that someone may not have thought to ask, or may not have had the chutzpah to ask in front of everybody. And so trying to, make lemonade out of those lemons when you can.
Absolutely. And the opposite of that, when you have crickets in a setting, what do you do with those crickets?
Absolutely. That is a fantastic question. There have been my fair share of walking in and you try to land that joke and it doesn't work. And that's what having your, depending again on the venue and what you're trying to talk about, having your talking points, knowing what you need to be going through. There's nothing worse than, I certainly, when I was managing my staff, them coming back and being like, there was nothing. And am I going, well, what was your 10-minute X, Y, and Z institution spiel, and they couldn't rattle it off. Being able to make sure that you have a list of things that you know that you can talk about. At your group information session, that's going to be a little bit different because you should probably have a 30 to 45 minute spiel that you're giving. But again, then, as you get, depending on where you are in your career, the questions that people want to hear more about. And if you're hearing crickets, being able to bring that up, do you all have questions about this, that, and the other thing? And for me, if any of y'all out there have ever had a chance to interact with me, I'm like to add in humor and I'm pretty self-deprecating. So I will often bring up my own family and my own personal story because we did everything wrong in our process. And a lot of times that, makes for a good laugh, but also can drive some points home of what you shouldn't do in your college search. And, being able to provide that. And everybody's different. Some people don't, feel comfortable with that. And so finding your own way of being able to bring up the points that these families need. We all know that families need to walk away from, whether it's a group information session, whether it's the high school visit, whether it's a panel or case study, there are key points that families need to walk away with. And so knowing your audience, knowing your venue, and really making sure that no matter if they ask questions or not, they're walking away with what they need.
Absolutely. And that self-deprecating humor works when you're having the awkward one-on-one meeting with students. And there's crickets too as a high school counselor. So no shame in that at all. And just kind of a fun question for you, Grace. What are some of the questions you've gotten that impress you the most from students, and why did they impress you?
Yeah, I think it's when students are asking either really thoughtful questions or really honest or genuine questions. We all as admission officers hate being either at that college fair table or in that group session. And when you do open it up for questions, how's y'all's English program? But being able to spin that, how does your English program fit in with this whole liberal arts curriculum that you keep talking about? That is a fantastic question. Or asking questions that really tie into the heart of your institution. You hate it when students might make assumptions and go off on those, but being able to break barriers. For us at Washington and Lee, we have a really interesting opportunity to talk about why we're named after a Confederate general. And I love it when students ask very pointed and thoughtful questions about, well, how does this influence your institution, or does it influence your institution? But for me as a first-generation college student myself, I love honest and authentic questions. When a kid is brave enough to be like, you keep saying liberal arts and sciences, and I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please elaborate? Really being thoughtful in that, and not being afraid. I mean, there are certain questions that we can coach our kids as much as we can, but sometimes they just don't know the answer. And so when they're very authentic about that, there is no greater joy than walking a student through and introducing them to a concept that they might not have known before, or introducing them to a way of approaching liberal arts, or approaching a college search, or approaching being an English major that they may not have ever thought about. I think so much of what we do is putting together a giant puzzle and helping students be able to see the image that is, evolving from that giant puzzle we're putting together. And that when students land questions that help clarify where they're going and how they're going to get there, it allows me to be a more effective counselor, and it allows me to be a more effective partner to our folks on the other side of the desk.
I would imagine that really compelling questions can also have the opportunity for you to begin visualizing that student on your campus? Like, is that the kind of question that your faculty members want to engage with? Have you ever seen a question, like just a real zinger in an admission information session or anything like that, have an impact on the admissibility of a student, or kind of reframe the way that a student was being considered?
Absolutely. And sometimes in the group information sessions or in larger sessions, maybe not as much, but when we're conducting interviews, that's another great opportunity where we really do hope that students are asking really engaging questions, and we have a real opportunity to engage with them. And yeah, there have been times when I've been in an interview and you're having that conversation and a student might ask a question, or we might come up and within that conversation on this whole spin-off, I interviewed a kid this fall who is really into creating his own surfactants and works for a company that does that. I mean, this kid's amazingly brilliant. And so as you know, we've been able to go through the process. I love being able to sit in committee and pull out those tidbits of, you know, let's talk about how they connected. And I could totally see how this student could fit the life of the mind of the institution. And for that matter, you know, I've had students who have, you know, asked some, zinger is a really appropriate way of phrasing that. That might not jive with, you know, I think we're all looking to be inclusive and welcoming places. And every now and then, sometimes a student might say something that, you know, goes against the grain of that. And it just makes you pause. And for me as a counselor, it makes me take a closer look at their application of, okay, was this just something that kind of rolled off the tongue in the moment? Or is this kind of ingrained into their day-to-day? And do I see any trends or, you know, in the letters of recommendation and that sort of thing? But more often than not, for these sorts of things, we try to keep a very open mind. Students are interviewing maybe for the very first time ever in their careers, and so we want to keep that in mind as we're moving through this process. It more often than not helps a student.
Well, that is an incredibly diplomatic answer, and a great way to assume the best, because I think you're exactly right that we don't all come from the same backgrounds and don't have all of the same experiences as each other. So assuming that these questions are coming from a place of sincerity from students versus just trying to catch you up, you know, per se. So to kind of go back to what we were talking about with high school visits, we have a question from an attendee about when you get to a high school visit and nobody's there, you know, no students have signed up to come see you. Do you utilize that time by meeting with a counselor? Do you prefer that over interacting with students? What does that scenario look like to you?
Absolutely. That is a fantastic question. In my previous life, more often than not, at my previous institution, kids wouldn't sign up for the sessions that we were putting, and so that can be really it can be demoralizing when you have a whole day of visits set up and not a student shows up. And I think it really depends on the schools that you're going to, and it's trying to be little Pollyanna as best as you can. You always want to get in front of someone, and if you can leverage and get in front of a counselor, that is gold. You know, you always want to talk to students. You know, that is why we do what we do. But if no student signs up and you have access to a counselor, being able to share, you know, the key points for your institution for that year, being able to share what is new and exciting and why you love working there. Because one counselor can reach, you know, a huge amount of students. Sometimes you'll get into the situation where you show up, no students have showed up, the counselor's on a lunch break or just happened to slip out to the bathroom. And all you have is the front desk receptionist for that institution. I would utilize that time. I would stand there and chat that person up and how are you doing? How, you know, did you know that so-and-so, you know, is attending my institution? Again, it's going back to having all those wonderful data points of knowing who's enrolled, knowing who's applied, knowing all of that. And being able to chat that person up of, oh yeah, I just saw that student for coffee, you know, a couple weeks ago, they're doing really great. And really because then, you know, the front desk receptionist, secretary, whomever that is the gatekeeper of that entire office. You know, there were some schools in my previous institution, I knew that woman's drink order from Starbucks and what kind of, how she liked her bagel. Awesome. Because if I didn't talk to her, I wouldn't talk to anybody. Mm-hmm. The other thing too is, you know, they might say, well, you know, there might be a student who could show. I always would sit for at least 15 minutes because you never know, a student might be running from class or a test. And also having that list of students who have expressed interest in your school. What I have done in the past is I literally would then take that time, plunk myself down in front of whomever that was, take out my happy pen, and I would have live on Post-it notes. They're all over my office and in my bags. And I would actually write to each individual student who was on my list, slap it on my brochure, and leave it with the front desk person and said, can you please get this to Chrissy, because she's expressed interest, she visited, I know she's slammed with AP courses and that's why she's not here today, but if you could give this to her, that would be great. And it left a great impression with the students. I would have students shoot me emails saying, I'm so sorry I missed you, this is why I wasn't there, but thank you for leaving me this. It also shows that you're making time for these kids. So, but again, it depends on your institution. It depends on how long that list is. There's a lot of variables there, but I think, always making the best out of the situation, and however that can be, because it can feel really bad when you're sitting there going, nobody wants to talk to me. But it will make an impact, if nothing else, for making you feel like you've not wasted your institution's funds being there. Because those little touches really do help along the way. I really and firmly believe that.
That Post-it note example of having the list and leaving a personal message, I mean, that's akin. There's the social media sensation right now on the College Admission Counselor Facebook page of personalized acceptance letters. Mm-hmm. It's that same idea of the personalized, I know you had something else to do, but I value you moment. Mm-hmm. Something that works just anecdotally really well with us is sometimes college reps will send us that list in advance of the meeting. Say, I'm really looking forward to meeting with your students tomorrow or in a couple of days. Here are the folks in our system. And while that's really great for us, why that's great for us is because our kids aren't always surprised the best about updating Naviance. Or if you work at a school that doesn't have Naviance, you have no way of knowing who would be interested. So whenever we get a list like that, we email those students and say the school is coming. So if you do have access to producing that and you can share it with the schools you're visiting, that would have a tremendous, tremendous benefit.
Absolutely. And, not everybody has fancy slate, and I recognize that. My previous institution when I worked there didn't. And so it's getting creative. It's getting creative on how you do that, how you partner with our amazing partners on the high school side. But it's also, doing some legwork yourself, depending on how much time you have, and crafting those rituals. Depending on the list, I used to phone. I used to get on the phone the night before and call each and every student, I'm going to be there. Did you get your pass? Doing what you can to help drum up that business so that you do see kids. It's getting creative.
It is. Well, thank you so much, Grace. And we're going to bring back Ben and Kerri to join you. And at this time, if anyone has questions, if you could please put them in that Q&A section, I'll make sure that we get a chance to answer them. And let's see, we've already got one. This is a question. How can you change a counselor's impression of a growing school? And I think the way that I'm interpreting this, and correct me if I'm wrong, person who asked this question, if you're a new school and you're just starting out and maybe you're smaller and you're making changes and that's evolving, how do you combat the preconceived notion that a university might already have of what your school and students are like? So Ben and Grace, this would probably be a great question for one of you to grab.
For me, it's really, it's getting to know you all. And, I in the fall, I get a flood of emails. Can you please visit my school? Do you have time for this? Do you have time for that? And, it's a lot of legwork, and I totally get that. But putting yourself out there in front of us, and also understanding the different venues that your students can utilize. There are thousands and thousands of high schools that we can visit in the fall, but there are other ways to get at us. We do essentially group information sessions in the evenings that students can go to, and we advertise all of that on our website. And it's not just for students. Counselors are more than welcome to come as well. And so that's another way of getting in front of us. So helping us provide that information, and really make sure that that we have all the nuances of that. And on the flip side too, if you're a smaller college trying to help with getting influence on the high school side of things, it's understanding the preconceived notions of how people think of you. And it's not always when you're, maybe a smaller institution. We have to deal with that all the time of, how do people perceive you in the marketplace, and is that accurate or not? It's a lot of self-reflection and a lot of understanding who you are and how people are translating that, and then helping folks to really see you for who you are now, maybe not what you were 10 years ago or whatever the case may be.
Great.
Totally, and I would add one more thing, Erin, particularly if you're asking for me to visit a high school. I mean, something as simple as helping me pack it. If you say, we'd love for you to come, we are down the street from this school and this school. I mean, almost helping me package my schools to make it I'm not going to fly to Atlanta to visit you just by yourself one bit, right? But if you kind of help me package it, that really helps a lot, especially, or if you're doing an evening program or something like that. You guys know what other events are going on in your communities. So building things around that can be helpful. I mean, if you can help me package it, I don't have a reason not to go. And I'm not looking for reasons not to go, but convenience is a factor as we mentioned, spending the college's resources appropriately. Well, if I'm down the street, that makes a lot of sense. So if you can help me package it, that helps.
That's great. Kerri, would you add anything?
I would like to, yes. So at my previous school, we were actually located kind of in a corridor where there were 3 to 4 or 5 other schools, and our address suggested that we were a different kind of school than maybe we really were. And so college reps, so sort of like reversing this, when reps would call me and say, oh, I'm visiting such and such a school and you're, 2 blocks from them, I would welcome that visit and then tell them then about the differences in my school and theirs, and sort of use that opportunity to showcase my school to a rep that ordinarily would, maybe except for our address, may not have ever considered calling. We were also very lucky that when a rep would call me, we would do just as you said, Ben, just sort of say, hey, did you know that there were, particularly if it was a new rep to the area, hey, did you know that there's, these other schools? So when you're placing the timing of your visits, you're not crossing town just to come back to the same location. But just sort of wanted to add that when you have the opportunity as a high school student to take a visit because they, look, it's a new rep, they're unfamiliar with the area, it's nice to take advantage of that.
That's great advice. And, as we're thinking about coming up into the summer, I'm sure people are already thinking about planning out for next year, even though we really haven't wrapped up this cycle yet, but that's how it works. So thinking about planning travel for next year on the college side, when is the best time for a high school counselor to reach out to the university if it's a school that's never visited before and say, I really want you to come visit us? When should they do that?
You'll probably get different responses depending on college rep, the level of which they delay things. For me personally, I would say May, maybe. May is a quiet time on the college end, but not quite time for us to go on vacation and things like that. So that's kind of a sweet spot for me, at least. And I welcome Grace's opinion because I'm sure she might have a different opinion. But that time is good because most colleges haven't planned their travel, but you're starting to kind of you're kind of packaging your invites all in one, right about that time, and then you start getting your invites out, in the next few months. But May for me is arguably the quietest time on any college campus from an admission perspective. So visits are down by a long shot. Hopefully you've got your class wrapped up or wrapping up, and so that's a good time for me.
I'd have to echo that, mid-May to mid-June, because oftentimes it is a quieter time for us, but more importantly for offices that experience turnover with their staff, most folks will have not left the office yet. So as they are being asked to wrap up their work before they move on to whatever adventure they are moving on to, it provides them time to say, oh, and BT dubs, here was this, so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle, because Summertime is one of the only times that we can take vacation. It's a time where there's lots of staff turnover, and an email sent in July can get lost in a heartbeat. And so really, setting yourself up mid-May to mid-June is a great time. And then follow up with us so that if for whatever reason we went, oh yeah, let's flag that, and then either that territory manager leaves or life got busy, then in August, just that refresher of, hey, and these are the updates, and, we're using that fancy online scheduler thing. Let us in on that. That's helpful. Very helpful.
Perfect. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have for right now. A lot of those questions came up during our individual conversations. So we will wrap up for today. Grace, Kerri, Ben, thank you so much for your time. This was an excellent, excellent session. I learned a lot, even hosting it, and I can't wait to go back and listen. And for anybody who wants to go back and view, this will be available online on the SACAC Professional Development website. But just remember that we're all in this community together. And I think the biggest takeaway that I've gotten from this conversation is ask. People want to help you, and people want, to work with you, regardless of which side of the desk that you're on. So thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. You'll see our contact information listed here as well. So if you wanted to reach out to any of our presenters individually to follow up, you are more than welcome to do so. We look forward to seeing you all in March, when we'll be hosting a webinar on advocacy and how you can get more involved in your local and national communities related to college counseling and higher education. So take care. Have a great day.